we're bonding with them over an hour, and we want it to be for a reason. It's because we want them to succeed. So it's not like we're there hoping that they fail at all. We're there to help and support and walk the candidate through the hour and the entire interview process.
This is the Industry of UX, Season 2, Inside the UX Hiring Journey. We talk to the experts to bring you the strategies, the thinking process, and the reasoning behind the hiring decisions in the UX job market. Let's dive into the episode. Hello, you wonderful UXers. Welcome back to another episode of the Industry of UX. I'm your host, Filippo Levotti. Today, I'm really excited to bring you an amazing episode. If you ever wondered how big tech companies hire UX designers, I have a big surprise for you. Well, I guess technically not a surprise since you probably read the title of the episode, but still a great episode nonetheless. We've got Earl Friedberg to walk us through the UX hiring process at Google. Earl has an amazing career. He leads the UX design team for Gmail and Google Chat. And before that, he also led the UX teams at Riverbed and BlackBerry. In this episode, Earl walks us through the candidate funnel at Google. We also talk about the expectations for both the portfolio walkthrough and, of course, the whiteboard challenge. Earl also sings with the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus, and he shares with us his approach to handling nerves during live performances, which can help you handle the nerves during an interview. Let me know what you think about the episode by tweeting at IndustryUX. No offense to Android users, but if you have an iPhone, give us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps us produce a better show and bring the podcast to a bigger audience. Okay, on to the conversation with Earl. So let's talk about that specifically, the candidate funnel. How does that work at Google? From the moment a candidate applies all the way to the offer and even accepting the offer from the candidate side?
Sure, yeah. So the way it works at Google is it's multi-step, right? It's not that different than any other company. You apply online, or maybe you're lucky enough that a recruiter reached out to you on LinkedIn. So one way or another, you've applied. And the first really step there is the recruiter does a preliminary phone screen with the candidate, right? So that's really to make sure that the candidate is kind of who they say they are and that their resume really fits the job they've applied to. So for instance, in the case where a candidate might have been a senior designer and accidentally applied to a junior designer job, that's where kind of it gets corrected within that initial phone screen.
Right.
Second step after that really is a technical phone screen with the hiring manager. So this is where the hiring manager spends about an hour going through, the candidate's background with them. They go through their portfolio, and then they're able to kind of answer any questions that the candidate has at that point. So that's like kind of the second step. And then the third and mostly final step is what we call an on-site interview, which these days is still remote, but it's a full day where we work with the candidate to learn about their past experiences. We interview them according to certain attributes that are specific to Google, as well as dive into any role-related knowledge.
Right. And that pretty much does that count as the end of the candidate funnel for that particular person?
Exactly. Those three stages are kind of the end.
How are you evaluate the candidate during that third step? Because I'm imagining that's the
make it or break it step.
Exactly.
For sure. Yeah. So it's really interesting to ask that. So at that stage, we have some rubrics, or we call them attributes, that we evaluate the candidate against. And the interesting thing, I think, with that is, at Google, we match people according to, it's not necessarily the specific job, but we look at least preliminary as matching them to the company.
Okay.
And so, at Google, we're looking for attributes around, are they a good culture ad? We look at their leadership style, that sort of thing, these Google wide attributes, in addition to that role related knowledge.
Right. Does that third step change in any way when you're hiring for, say, a junior or a senior? Or, I mean, I'm imagining maybe some of these attributes change, but how about the methodologies that you follow throughout the day?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, the methodology is actually pretty much the same. It's same attributes as well that we
Huh.
evaluate, but they are evaluated against a certain, like a different kind of threshold,
Right.
so to speak.
So I'm really interested on that third day. I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to kind of draw a parallel here with Amazon because
Sure.
the process is somewhat similar to Amazon, meaning that there is a phone screen, talking to the hiring manager, sometimes even talking to someone from let's say your hiring manager is a dev manager or is a business, it's part of the business. It's not necessarily someone that like a UX designer, right? You will
Mhm,
talk to
mhm,
this hiring manager and then they will also have you talk to someone in UX that you either are going to be working with or partner with throughout for your new role.
mhm, mhm.
Then you have, the full day when you have presentations and all of that. And that's kind of what I wanted to ask you. So I know that
Sure.
on the Amazon side, we have a past work presentation and then a whiteboard exercise, because that gives us
Yes.
a good understanding of how you can, first off, what you have done previously, which is good. And how do you articulate that when you present to a panel, right? How do you articulate your design decisions and your storytelling skill set? But
Mhm.
then there is also that on the spot whiteboard exercise, which
Which
is okay.
everybody is terrified about,
Tell me
for
about it.
sure.
I know you have mentees.
The whiteboard challenge is a significant part of our rubric, and kind of like you said, and maybe I wasn't clear before, but yeah, like the day basically starts off with a portfolio walkthrough. That's great because you get to know the candidate, you get to know everybody on the interview panel, and then usually it's immediately followed with the whiteboard challenge. And yeah, the whiteboard challenge really, really kind of tests your thinking, on your feet. It's definitely, I know, candidates talk to me about being stressed and nervous. And really the thing they're most nervous about is the whiteboard challenge because you don't know what to expect. And so really with the whiteboard challenge, what we're looking there for is the candidate's, ability to define problems, solve them. We're looking at their interaction design knowledge. And especially because, Google's a big company, we also really, really strongly look at the candidate's ability to collaborate with the interviewer. Are they asking questions? Are they checking in? That sort of thing. So that might be where kind of the interview process might differ a little between, let's say, Google and a startup, is that collaboration and especially working with different types of roles is really, really important in order to succeed at Google. Whereas maybe at a startup, it's a little more acceptable not to have worked with a user researcher
Right.
before or maybe a product manager. Yeah, usually, the whiteboard challenge, we try not to trick the candidates. We're not really looking to trick them. We're really just looking to understand the way they think and understand the way they solve problems. And again, the way they collaborate and work with the interviewer on the problems.
Gotcha. Yes, that is definitely the way I normally describe it to my mentees, because even for my mentees, I know you have mentees too, so you can totally empathize with this. But every time we talk about the whiteboard challenge, it's always panic. Very, very nervous. I had a mentee the other day that was very nervous about it. She was going to have a mock whiteboard challenge, and right after our conversation, and she was very nervous about it. And she was expecting almost that she was nervous for a few things, for a few reasons. But the main reason is that she thought that she had to wireframe the entire experience A to Z. And she was really stressed about the time. And she was really stressed about the fact that, hey, I only have 1 hour with this person. Am I really asked to go in and design the entire app experience or website? And, it's
That is not the ask at all. I hope you
exactly.
clarified to her that that's not the ask. We're not trying to get free labor out of this. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah, we're really just trying to really understand how the candidate goes about, problem definition and problem solving, right? And we really do want to see if they're able to independently take something that's very ambiguous and probably very broad and put some focus on it, spend, an hour time managing that hour, with the interviewer and kind of giving like a very, very small glimpse into how they might go about solving a design challenge should they be hired by Google. But yeah, we
Exactly.
see, a lot of fumbles with the whiteboard challenge for sure. And part of that is because it is somewhat very artificial, right? It is an
Yeah.
artificial situation to put somebody into. And so the best advice I could give, to my springboard students and to people preparing, to go through this interview process is really to practice on their own and with a partner whiteboard challenges, because practice really helps kind of evolve that skill of, mastering this whiteboard challenge. And so as you start practicing, you start learning, okay, what to do, what not to do, right? It becomes pretty clear. And there's tons of great articles online
Yep.
about, how to master a whiteboard challenge. But I would say the number one mistake I really, really see, and it's quite frequent that I see this, is that candidates jump into solutions way too quickly without really understanding the problem, defining it, defining the target audience that they're thinking about, defining some assumptions. And so if I was to give any advice, is to just like take a breather, slow down, understand the problem, spend 10 to 15 minutes just really kind of diving into it. Make sure you're solid on kind of the area of focus first, and then go into solutioning. And I think that's very common advice now that's given to candidates applying.
Yes. I remember this one particular candidate that I administered a whiteboard exercise to. She was able to only get, from a deliverable standpoint, half of a user flow because we spent a good chunk of it on the fact that she really wanted to find out what the problem was that we were trying to solve, who the target audience was, limitations, of course, and all the assumptions, understanding, even laying out the potential red routes, like listing them out as you slowly make your way from the big generic things to, narrowing everything down. But yeah, I think that that's a great way to look at it. And sometimes there is no time, there is no need to get even to wireframing anything. Really, one of the things that I tell my mentees is, you have to get the first part right. Sometimes they're not giving you a full hour, sometimes they give you half an hour. And so you have to make it work there. But the expectation is not for you to wireframe the entire thing or flesh it out. We, as hiring managers, as you mentioned, we want to understand how you process this information and how you deal with ambiguity, like a very cloudy prompt. And with that said, I wanted to ask you, what is, if you're comfortable giving this out, or maybe you can make a parallel so it's not too giving away too much, but what will be a classic Earl from Google prompt during during a whiteboard
You're going to give
exercise?
away all my secrets. Yeah, that's a really good question. So usually I like to give a challenge with some sort of emerging technology involved. So whether it's drones or maybe it's glasses, and that way there's a little less context to refer to,
Right.
less familiarity to the space, and really it kind of gets at, is the candidate able to ask the right questions in order to understand the new emerging technology and understand this new context. So without giving away too much, I think at Google you could expect a whiteboard challenge that usually would involve some sort of constraint, I guess I would say, that involves an emerging technology.
That's brilliant. I really like that. It's also energizing, right? Instead of, hey, could you design an e-commerce app or a retail website
Oh,
or
or
something
another
that
food
is
delivery app. Just shoot me if I have to give that design challenge. Right. And think about it this way too. Like the interviewer is there too because they're passionate about shaping the future of the UX community in their job. And they don't want to sit there for an hour being bored out of their mind with this, candidate. They want to have some fun too. So
Exactly.
really, this is a good chance to let not just your problem solving skills shine, but also your personality and your, ability to have fun in a professional context. Really let it shine.
The only thing that I will add to that is that breaks away a little bit from it, but we understand that you are nervous. As hiring managers, we understand that you're nervous. We sometimes are nervous too while we give you these prompts, but we understand that we are nervous and you understand that sometimes they're going to freeze a little bit. We don't
100%.
expect like a, I don't know, cold, calculated robot, right?
No, and there is a misconception. Like, we as interviewers, we want our candidates to succeed. We want this candidate, we're bonding with them over an hour, and we want it to be for a reason. It's because we want to, hire for a particular position. We want them to succeed. So it's
Yeah.
not like we're there hoping that they fail at all. We're there to help and support and walk the candidate through the hour and the entire interview process, to be frank. So that's what I would say for sure. It's like, I don't want anybody to not do poorly. And that's why with whiteboard challenges, I'm okay nudging the candidate if they get stuck or if they have questions. That is totally reasonable. It's totally reasonable to get stuck and to have the interviewer nudge the candidate more in the right direction. So
Let's talk a little bit about other steps of this candidate funnel or maybe other exercises. We talked
sure.
about the whiteboard exercise. What is also important to know about the presentation that normally occurs prior to that? What are things that you're looking for in this presentation?
Sure, yeah. So the portfolio walkthrough is weighted very heavily as part of the interview process. You're typically presenting your portfolio walkthrough. It's the first thing you're doing in the day, right? And so all the interviewer panel, like everybody from the panel, is there. It's your first impression. It's the first time the candidate has a chance to show who they are as a person, as a designer. And so one of the first things I'm looking for really is like, who is this person? Tell me more about this person. What do
Mhm.
they like? What do they not like? What are their passions? What are their interests? Can I work with this person? And that's going through all the interviewers' minds as you're presenting, right? Is like, can I work with this? Is this somebody that I would enjoy working with? And I think a lot of designers and junior designers to be don't really think of it that way. They really think of their portfolio walkthrough maybe as a way for people to get to know their work, but really it's a way to get to know the person in a lot of ways. And so I'm looking to get to know the person. Yes, I'm looking to know a bit more about their history. I'm also looking to understand, like, how do they handle struggles that they've gone through in the design
Yep.
process. I see a lot of presentations that only showed me the happy path. I don't want to know about the happy path. I want to know about the struggles, about the challenges, about the messy parts of the design project, because that's really what design is about, right? It's
Yep.
about the messy parts. And so it's interesting because a lot of candidates will leave out the messy bits because they want this tight little neat pack portfolio presentation that's very linear and smooth. And really what we're looking for is the scrappy, napkins, scratches. Tell me about the pivots, the big pivots. Tell me about the people who you had conflicts with. How did you resolve them? All the hurdles that you went through as a designer to get to this point. I really want to know about those.
Yeah. That is what gives you a view of the person behind the portfolio. And this is something that I always tell my mentees is that that's a great tip normally that I also give on how do you stand out when people are looking at your portfolio is like to let that personality shine through. And the same thing happen, to do the same with the case studies or the portfolio presentations, show how the personality came through, show the struggle. Actually, I had another guest on the show. Their name is Adrian, and they told me that when looking at a case study, they care more about how the sausage is made than the polished UI and visual design and all of that. As you
Agreed.
mentioned, the nice things that, yeah, of course, I know that's beautiful, right? So linear and so perfect. But when you and this is like one other thing that normally you ask with behavioral questions Because normally behavioral questions ask more about the, hey, when things went sideways, how did you reassess and adjust it normally?
Yeah, I would say I definitely want to know about how the sausage is made. It's such an important part of the story, really, that should not be left out. And just to add to that, I'm really so from a hiring manager perspective, almost 90% of the time, case studies look the exact same. They look like they're coming from a factory. It's problem, discovery, research, right? Solution, right? The headlines look the same. And you're never going to stand out if you have kind of this prescribed theoretical design process with these titles that are, not that frankly interesting. So one thing I do talk a lot to my mentees about is how to create kind of hooks in their headlines and hooks in their story. And this is really that comes from being a good editor, editorial kind of avenue here. But some of the most interesting portfolios I've seen, and some of the applications that really get noticed are the ones that have these hooks that are almost super controversial, right? Like I just read a case study the other day for one of our roles, and it was that the title was "Why Gmail Sucks." And I work on Gmail, so of course I'm going to respond to that, right? Like, what? What? Somebody who's applying to this job thinks Gmail sucks. And so they were good because the next sentence right after that was actually I was just kidding. Gmail is great, but here are the things I think things I would improve and areas where I think Google can invest. And so to me that just means, oh, the candidate really knows their audience, or they're really looking at targeting their audience with this. And so that is something, as a designer, you can only hope for in a candidate, is that they really, just like they would in the design practice, they're also thinking about their audience when they apply to the job. They're thinking about the company they're applying to, and they're thinking about their interview panel.
Yeah, that speaks a lot about the communication skill set that they have, right? The empathy that they also have for the person that's going to read this.
100%. Yeah.
So it's always a good thing to have that instead of having boring, well, I won't say boring, but like very matter of fact titles like the problem, my role, the solution, right? As I have a mentee at Springboard, and she was really insecure about the titles of her chunks of her case study because she was very descriptive in her titles. So instead of saying the problem, she will describe it, just give a little bite-sized sentence about some aspect of the problem that was interesting. And she was very discouraged because she showed that to a fellow mentee at Springboard, and this mentee gave her feedback that, hey, no, you should go with very descriptive, very factual titles like the problem, my role, all of that, because hiring managers only have a few seconds or a few minutes to scan through your portfolio, and so they have to see those sections to check the boxes. And I gave her the opposite advice. I told her, no, these titles are actually are going to make you stand out from the people like this other mentee that have the problem, the solution, my role, and all of that, which is almost like a standard.
Exactly. And kind of like what you mentioned, like I actually, let's be honest, I only have a couple minutes to review this portfolio, right? Or this candidate. And so typically, what do I look at? I look at the imagery, right? The visuals and the headings and the subheadings, right? And if I could, get a story out of the headings, then maybe I'll be interested in reading a little more of the content. So I think your advice was spot on, actually. It's because that the hiring manager only looks at the portfolio for a couple minutes that you should have headings that are interesting and really thoughtful and describe the problem you're solving.
I personally normally look at the headings, of course, and visuals or lack of visuals, meaning that if I see that there is a lot of text, now I want to know why aren't there any visuals. So now I start reading or scanning through because maybe the title of that particular paragraph is telling me that they did something that maybe they didn't have the skill set to put in a visual, but I want to learn. So,
Sure.
so
Sure.
everyone has
Sure.
a similar but different approach, if that makes any sense. But
Sure.
I think we are all looking for the same signals, right? There's nothing wrong with being creative. UX, it's a very functional practice, but it's also a creative field. So there's nothing wrong with that. All right. Now that we talked about that, I wanted to mention another thing. in our pre-recording call, we talked about one thing that I thought was really interesting. So when, for instance, you apply to Amazon, Amazon really puts a lot of value in how you present to them when it comes to operational efficiency. And you have to be very customer obsessed and operationally efficient. So scalability definitely plays a role. When you go to Facebook, they care a lot about the design and how did you come up with that particular experience, and if you can break it down, accessibility, and really, really focus on the design, on the product design itself. What about Google?
Great question. It's all about collaboration and partnerships at Google. That is a huge area of focus for us. At Google, like a lot of other companies, we have really large design teams. We also have a lot of different types of UX roles. We also have a lot of products. We are in a lot of different domains. We have a lot of families of products. And so at Google, what's really important because of all this is getting candidates and really we call them Googlers, right? Having Googlers that are able to independently collaborate and work together. And I can't tell you how many times recruiters have brought me these like superstar designer candidates that on paper and even their work is amazing, but when you dig into it you realize, oh well, this person actually can't collaborate with other people. They're a
Yep.
superstar designer, but I can't imagine them working with my team or hundreds of other people. This is like a solo designer, solo senior designer. So this, might be great for a different company, but for Google, we're not looking for that type of candidate at all. We're really looking for somebody who does have that aptitude to be able to collaborate and that proactivity to be able to partner. And so some of the things we look for there are evidence of collaboration with roles other than their own. We also look for evidence that they have of collaborating with people who maybe don't come from the same background as them, maybe don't look like them. And that's very, very, very important, especially at a multinational company like Google.
Nice. That's
Yeah,
great to hear that. So I have two more questions.
sure.
The last one is, I know that you sing in the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus, so you are used to perform in front of a large audience. And maybe we can use some of that to answer the next question. How do you manage nerves when you are in front of such a large audience? Maybe we can translate that into how can candidates manage their nerves when they come and interview at Google?
Oh, that's such a great question. I have to say it's what really has helped me, especially, perform is actually not to manage the nerves, but just to acknowledge that they're there, that they're always going to be there. It's normal. And it's this acknowledgement and this kind of normalizing that I think actually really helps. Talking about it, especially before a performance, right? About how nervous we are and all the areas we might not do well in, but we're just going to power through it. That often helps. And so, I think as a designer too, and especially somebody interviewing, I think just acknowledging that you are going to be nervous, even letting the interviewers know that you're going to be nervous. They're happy to be there. They're happy to support you. And so I think acknowledgement is probably the best route there. I don't know if I have a better answer for that, but acknowledgement has helped me.
Earl, this was amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I think you brought out so many great insights, not just from the Google side, but also when looking at UX interviewing in UX as a whole, as a big umbrella. So thank you so much. One last question, as I promised. Are you open to mentoring outside of Springboard? I guess it's a twofold question then. Are you open to mentoring outside of Springboard? And where can people find you online if they want to reach out to you?
Great question. I actually really, really love to hear from people. I would love to hear from your audience. I don't have all the time in the world to spend, but I definitely super passionate about shaping, our future community of young designers, of junior designers who are really looking to get their first job and really looking to get into the field. They could happily reach out to me in a couple different ways. They could contact me on my website. My website is just earlf.com, which I swear will be up by the time this podcast is up. They can also find me on LinkedIn. Happy to respond there. I'm also on Twitter if they want to follow me. It's just Earl Friedberg. Nothing too fancy there. Would be very happy to hear from your audience.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are interested in any of the resources we mentioned, all the links are on the episode page of our website, theindustryofux.com. Thanks to Earl for coming on the show. Thanks to Julian at Podcast Edition for the audio engineering work. If you have any feedback about the episode or the show, let us know by tweeting at IndustryUX. If you really want to help or say thank you from the bottom of your heart, please leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps us climb the charts and bring our show to a bigger audience. Last but not least, thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to talking to you next week.